The following presentation was made possible through the generosity of the insurance firm of Lester Smart, Thurman, Tremmel and Arndt, 210 9th Street South, Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin.
In this presentation of History by Request, we're going to delve into a part of our past that deals with various industries that once prospered in the area, but eventually fell by the wayside. In so doing, we cannot help but ask ourselves what might have been if they had survived and were still a part of our local economy. For example, did you know that at one time there were 3 cigar manufacturers in Wisconsin Rapids? Or should I say Grand Rapids? While it is true that they were small operators compared to the large tobacco firms, for a time they did a brisk business. One such firm was known as the Grand Rapids Cigar Company. Except for this box and name, little is known about the firm. However, in lieu of the factory number, it's conceivable that the Grand Rapids Cigar Company was a supplier to a larger wholesaler. This whole pendant is evidence of another local cigar maker, the Badger Cigar Company. Co-owners of the company were Max Torzuski and James Skarweski, who made their cigars at a west side location in the 1100 block of West Grand Avenue on the south side of the street. The Badger firm ceased operations around 1920. The third and best remembered local cigar maker was the Frank Durnbach and Sons cigar manufacturers located at 1230 First Street North. Frank Durnbach was born August 23, 1859 in Chicago. At the age of 16, he started his own cigar company, and by 1881 had 20 men working for him in his own building. In 1893, he decided to take up farming and moved to Portage County. By 1910, Frank grew tired of the farming business, and he and his son John went back into the cigar business when in 1916 they moved to Wisconsin Rapids. Frank's wife Kate and John's wife Mabel were in charge of stripping the leaves, an operation that preceded the cigar making process. After World War I, son Adolf joined in the business. Frank and his 2 sons ran the operation from the east end of the second floor of the First Street location. This is a picture of John working at one of the 3 cigar tables. The cigars were bundled in packs of 60 and sold to local businessmen and retail firms. Some of their brand names were Long Ends, Havana Tip, and Ladella. Durnbach cigars sold for 5 cents each. Their premium cigars were 10 cents. The company ended business in 1931. John moved to Los Angeles, where he ran a very prosperous cigar-making business until his death in 1944. There was also a time when we had 2 breweries in the city. After all, how could those early settlers survive without their beer? In this view, our camera is located on the Consolidated Dam facing north as we go back in time. This was the first brewery in the area, built by a man named Schmidt in 1859. In 1880, the Schmidt Brewery was bought by Jacob Lutz and his brothers. The Lutz Brewery burned on July 23rd of 1894. The Lutz brothers immediately began to make plans for a modern new brick building. The Lutz brothers also operated another brewery in the same area known as the Twin City Brewery. After all, we were Twin Cities at the time, Grand Rapids on the east side of the river and Centralia on the west side. In 1859, the Twin City Brewery was also destroyed by fire. The Litz brothers incorporated the Grand Rapids Brewing Company in 1905, operating in this modern new brick building. In this view, the brewery crew poses outside of the new building. Moving inside, we catch some of the boys sampling a fresh batch of their brew. This was a typical brewery interior at the time, showing a part of the bottling operation. These bottles from the Grand Rapids Brewery are a part of the Philip Brown collection. Of course, not unlike the big brewers in Milwaukee, the Grand Rapids Brewery Company had to invest in a few promotional items, as is evidenced with these colorful trays, also a part of Phil's collection. The Grand Rapids Brewery flourished until Prohibition put an end to the brewery business. In 1921, the building was converted to a cannery, then called the Grand Rapids Canning Company, later the Sampson Canning Company. In more recent years, the building has been occupied by the Northern Steel Castings Foundry Company. It was on March 5th of 2005, exactly 100 years from the time of its construction, that a large portion of the building was destroyed by fire. There was immediate concern that we might lose yet another industry in the community, but Northern Steel Castings saw fit to remain local. The Foundry Company promptly went to work on the damaged structure to what we must assume is a more efficient concept for their foundry operation. Here, in this 2005 view, our camera is located at the intersection of West Grand Avenue and the Riverview Expressway, a very noteworthy location. Don Knuth tells us that this area was once home to the MacKinnon Hub and Spoke Factory as we see it here. In fact, Don tells me that his mother once worked for the MacKinnon Company. High-quality hubs and spokes were an essential part of wagon wheels at the time. It is interesting to note in this picture that, like so many factories of that era, the company had a steam whistle that was used to mark the beginning and end of each day's work period. Obviously, with the end of the horse and buggy, the hub and spoke factory had little chance of survival. Another industry that once flourished in our Grand Rapids area were furniture factories. As a matter of interest, the very first time that George W. Mead, at the age of 21, came to Grand Rapids in the early spring of 1891, he tells us that he came on a business errand. Since Mr. Mead was in the furniture business with his brother in Illinois, and there was no paper company here at the time, we must assume that his visit was related to one of the Grand Rapids furniture factories. At the time, he knew nothing about water power or paper making. In this 2005 view, our camera is located on Fremont Street. Perhaps you recognize the location as the place where we deposit our waste paper, the Enso plant. Many years back, in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, the view was much different. This was the Oberbeck Brothers Furniture Factory. One must assume that quite a number of people were employed here, judging from the size of the buildings. Some of the furniture made here was sold under the Indian name of Ottawagham. During World War I, the government declared furniture factories as non-essential, and in 1917, the company converted to making paper boxes under the name of Ottawagham Paper Products Company, and eventually became a part of Consolidated Papers, known as the Ottawagham Division. This is another view of the building from the opposite direction. This 1937 catalog lists the many styles and specifications of corrugated and fiber products made at the plant. The small ditch in the foreground is all that remains of Hall Creek, which was later diverted underground. It was in the late 40s that this building was demolished to make room for the ever-expanding Consolidated Consulwell division, where paper-based laminated plastics were produced. Another of our furniture factories was the Whipperman Company, located on the east side of the river, just north of the Green Bay and Western, now Central Wisconsin, railroad tracks between First Street and the river. Like the Oberbeck factory, Whipperman also went out of business. The Whipperman buildings were later occupied by the Sunshine and Siegel Clothing Company until they were destroyed by fire in May of 1931. Another local furniture company was that of Matt Caudy. Mr. Caudy's company specialized in custom-made furniture, and he too eventually went out of business. One of the earliest settlers in our area was John Rablin. In 1869, Mr. Rablin built the Rablin and Robb Foundry and Machine Shop. It was located in the 1000 block of First Street North, then known as Water Street, just ahead of the present-day Consolidated Dam. Rablin later sold the shop to new owners who converted it to a flour mill. John Rablin had a second foundry and machine shop in the same area on Water Street, where he continued his foundry and machine operations. In 1896, the business was incorporated by new owners and became known as the Grand Rapids Foundry. In 1905, the Grand Rapids Foundry joined with American Carbonic Company and built a new brick plant on the west side of the river. Here, our camera is located on High Street, facing west as we go back in time to the way it was. This was the modern new American Carbonic building. The Grand Rapids Foundry still owned water power rights at their former location on the east side of the river and sold these rights to Consolidated with the stipulation that Consolidated Power Company was to furnish 30 horsepower delivered by electricity on first demand and for all time to this American Carbonic plant at 610 High Street. American Carbonic specialized in building high-quality refrigeration machines. In their heyday, the company had offices in major cities as listed here and proudly proclaimed main office and factory, Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. Their success story is spelled out in this partial list of customers. This Wisconsin Rapids company supplied refrigeration for the likes of Union Station and the Tribune Tower in Chicago, for theaters, hotels, and hospitals throughout the country. American Carbonic also manufactured and sold refrigeration equipment to the U.S. Navy for their battleships and the like. This is an artist's conception of what the High Street location would eventually look like, and there was nothing in their 43-page brochure to indicate that such a plant didn't already exist. Certainly an impressive piece for distant customers who would never visit the facility. The brochure also included views of various departments of the carbonic plant. This is a photo showing 38 of the employees taken in August of 1930. It was about this time when the company that once foresaw such a brilliant future began to falter. New compact methods of refrigeration using Freon in place of ammonia began to flood the market, and combined with the jarring effects of the Great Depression brought the company to its knees. There was no market for converting to other products, and American Carbonic was gradually dissolved. The last listing of the company in the local telephone directory was in 1937. Imagine what it could have meant to the community had this once great company survived. Of course, there were many businesses that felt the devastating effects of the Great Depression, but all in all, this central Wisconsin area came through it much better than most of the country, thanks to various innovations by Consolidated and NEPCO Papers. Like Consolidated Paper's development of the Massey Coder, which resulted in healthy contracts with Time Incorporated for their new Life magazine and others. Then came World War II. Unemployment was next to zero when this two-page spread ran in our local paper on July 3rd of 1944, listing the names of 2,287 men and women from Southwood County who were serving in the military. A heading on the ad indicated 2,287 reasons to buy war bonds, and their number was still growing. Much of the workforce was made up of women who replaced the men who had gone off to war. Five prominent local citizens sponsored the ad: G.W. Mead, Theed Brazo, Charlotte Witter, Bill Taylor, and Ralph Wiltrout. Another once prosperous employer in the area was Preway. It was in 1915 when the Prentice Weaver Stove Company was started, with T.A. Taylor as president, G.N. Prentice as secretary, and C.R. Rude as treasurer. Their first products consisted of what was known as a collapsible gasoline camp stove. To accompany the little stove, the Prentice Weaver Stove Company also made cooking utensils for camping purposes. Prior to that time, Mr. Prentice is said to have manufactured hand-operated potato planters. The company's products were sold all over the U.S. and Canada, and eventually exported worldwide. At the time, there was a very famous boat builder and racer named Gar Wood. This is a Preway ad featuring Gar Wood in a telephone conversation in which he indicated that in spite of 35-mile-an-hour winds, they never missed a meal on their boat race thanks to their Prentice Weaver stove. The company name was eventually changed to Preway. After a time, the camp stove business was sold off as the Preway product line gradually evolved into fine kitchen stoves, space heaters, and related products. During World War II, Preway converted to military products for the armed services and earned an Army-Navy E for excellence. Following the war, Preway continued to prosper. This is a copy of the 1956-57 wage scale agreement between the company and the Machinists Union. Top hourly pay was for the tool and die makers at $2.31. Very commendable pay in 1957. Fine quality fireplace units and gas grills became a major part of the Preway product line, and it seemed that the company was unstoppable. Then, disaster struck in the late 1980s when Preway attempted to enter the furnace business. The company that Preway bought was in trouble due to overproduction, slow sales, and poor quality control. Apparently, Preway had assumed these liabilities in the contract of sale, but the furnace company burden proved too massive, and the Preway company was forced out of business. Certainly a great loss to this central Wisconsin area. That's probably enough of what might have been. Now let's focus on the bright side. It was just last year in September of 2004 that our local paper mill celebrated its 100th anniversary. I was honored when the folks at Stora Enso asked me to produce a video of this historic event. And with their permission, I'm delighted to bring it to you now, just as it was first presented on that occasion in September 2004.
The Wisconsin River is the greatest and most valuable servant of Consolidated Water, Power, and Paper Company. I saw it first in the early summer of 1891 when I was 20 years of age. Walking toward the town, I heard a great roar of waters, and suddenly there came to my view the wonderful rapids of the old Wisconsin. The river was running at flood stage, and the view was magnificent. I felt spellbound with a strange fascination as I watched the fury of the waters striking the big rocks and dashing up great showers of spray and foam. I knew nothing about water power and little dreamed that it would one day in the future become my task to harness and set to work that majestic force of the river. I went on my way as one who had been changed by some new experience. Only a few times have I been so impressed. Until that day, I had not realized that nature held such great power and beauty in her hands. In 1902, I again came to Wisconsin Rapids shortly after the death of Mr. J.D. Witter, who, in the company of Mr. Nels Johnson, had acquired several small water powers. They had planned to develop all these into one big power under the name of Consolidated Water Power Company. That summer, Mr. Johnson took me almost daily up the banks of the Wisconsin, visiting the beautiful islands and measuring the height that the waters would reach after the dam should be built. Death removed Mr. Johnson very suddenly that fall, and it then fell to my lot to carry out the long-delayed project of building the dam and paper mill. To assist me in the work, I selected a group of honest and rugged men of experience in river work and in mill building. We started early in 1903 and had the big dam and the buildings all completed by the 1st of June, 1904. From the windows of my office, I can see the glistening water of the Wisconsin, and again from my home on the little island known as Belle Isle, the river talks to me as it flows along and falls in cascades over the rocks. Never at rest, never quiet, the Wisconsin is a thing of life, of movement, and of beauty.
Do you remember that sound? If you're an old-timer in Rapids, you will. It's the Wisconsin Rapids Mill steam whistle. For nearly 40 years, from about 1928 until 1968, it blew every day at 8 o'clock in the morning, at noon, and at 5 o'clock in the evening. This mill and the people who've worked here for the past century have created memories for a lot of folks. Some good, some bad, but always lasting. What do you remember about the Wisconsin Rapids Mill? Let's take a look back and find out. Although the mill celebrates its paper-making centennial in 2004, Consolidated Water Power Company was incorporated in 1894, a full decade earlier. You see, papermaking was replacing sawmills as the main industry of successful cities along the river. So, on July 16, 1894, a small group of individuals who owned water rights and property along the Wisconsin River in the twin cities of Grand Rapids and Centralia combined their holdings to form the Consolidated Water Power Company. From the beginning, it was a shaky partnership. Bickering between the partners caused several to withdraw from Consolidated. This left only J.D. Witter, Nels Johnson, George Hill, and Witter's son Isaac as shareholders. In 1902, disaster struck with the untimely death of first J.D. Witter and then Nels Johnson only 9 months later. Witter's son-in-law, George Mead, was tapped to move forward with their dream of harnessing this majestic river for papermaking. Mead was up to the task. Construction of the dam, paper mill, and pulp mill began in the spring of 1903, nearly 9 years after the signing of the Articles of Incorporation. The dam was completed in March 1904. The pulp grinders started up 2 months later in early May. Then, in early June, the mill began operating the world's first 2 electrically powered paper machines. Those machines would become known as number 11 and number 12. By the end of the first year, the mill showed a net profit of $90,000. As a paper company, Consolidated was on its way. Originally, the mill was called the Grand Rapids Mill, after the town where it was located. In 1920, when the east side town of Centralia and the west side town of Grand Rapids combined to become Wisconsin Rapids, the mill changed its name as well in support of the city's progressive thinking. The money made on the sale of paper during the early years was invested over and over again. As the years passed, other mills were built, sold, and purchased. The Wisconsin Rapids Mill also benefited from capital investments. In 1916, construction of the mill's number 13 board machine began. The machine, which still uses waste paper as its source of pulp, came online in 1917. While it seldom receives much recognition, number 13 has played a vital role for the past 87 years, manufacturing paperboard grades from reclaimed fiber. In 1920, the mill began construction of a new machine, number 14. It was completed in July 1921. Little did anyone dream that later this machine would shoulder an invention that would define the company's destiny. The Wisconsin Rapids Mill produced newsprint in its first 2 decades, but its future was not in newsprint. The idea was to specialize. In 1929, the mill converted from newsprint to book papers. Consolidated had moderate success in this market for a few years. However, a competitor developed a better process, costing the company its major book account and idling number 14 machine. In 1933, Peter Massey, a printer, proposed an idea for making coated paper to George Mead, an invention that could coat paper without removing the sheet from the paper machine. Mead sensed the potential of Massey's work and ordered the coating device installed on the number 14 machine. Trial runs showed the idea was workable, but revealed fundamental weaknesses in the initial design. Many hard, disappointing weeks of refining and rebuilding the coater and paper machine followed. Finally, Massey and machine crews made an experimental sheet that was coated on both sides. In August 1934, the first Consolidated Massey roll coater was installed permanently on number 14. This was the first coated paper manufactured in a single high-speed operation. It revolutionized the paper industry and the magazine industry as well. Within 2 years, Consolidated converted 7 paper machines to the new process. In 1937, the company signed its largest contract ever for coated paper with Time Incorporated. The contract was for Life, its weekly photo magazine. That led to the construction of number 15 paper machine. It produced paper only for the new magazine. A neon sign was installed at the dry end reading, "Built for Life, Operated for Life." From the late 1930s to the 1950s, the company gradually upgraded the quality and number of products produced, but no major developments occurred during that period. Sadly, the 1960s were marked by the death of George Mead I. In the early 1950s, his son Stanton had taken the reins as Consolidated's president, which were then passed to George Mead's grandson, George, in 1966. The paper-making industry continued searching for improvements. A new coating process that submerged the paper in a puddle of coating and then smoothed it off with the steel blade, eventually known as blade coating, began to take shape. Off-machine blade coaters were added at the mill in 1963, 1969, 1984, and 1992. In 1973, the company broke ground for a converting facility to replace the mill's old finishing room. Again, the company continued reinvesting in machine upgrades and improvements to continue producing the highest quality products. In 1989, Consolidated announced that it would build a new paper machine and finishing operations at the Wisconsin Rapids Mill and expand its sheeting operations. It was the largest expansion program in company history, valued at nearly $500 million. The mill's converting plant expansion included construction of 2 high-rise product warehouses and a fleet of robot-like automated guided vehicles. The new paper machine, number 16, started up in March 1992. It produced coated printing paper used for brochures, annual reports, and high-quality publications. Since its initial construction, number 16 has been rebuilt twice, once in 2000 and most recently again in February of this year. These upgrades include state-of-the-art technology that positions number 16 machine as one of the most efficient, highest quality machines of its type in North America. In 2000, the unthinkable happened. Consolidated Papers was sold to Stora Enso, a Nordic company based in Helsinki, Finland. Stora Enso wanted to expand in the North American paper market, and Consolidated, a family-owned business, was reaching the end of its lineage with George Mead II. However, this was taking place at the beginning of a difficult economic time. The entire paper industry was starting to consolidate and downsize in order to compete in a global market. Many of the paper companies who saw the boom years of the 1980s and early 90s, Champion, Repap, Union Camp, and Willamette, are now either gone or part of other companies. Though economic conditions have been dismal the past few years and cost-cutting efforts have been necessary, Stora Enso continues investing in this mill's future. And, as they have for a century, things continue to change. The Wisconsin Rapids Mill's original twin machines are retired, number 11 in 1996 and number 12 in 2002, but they served the company well for nearly a century. Number 15 paper machine was shut down and sold in 1999. The number 13 board machine is now part of Enso North America and supplies coreboard to that mill. And, as was done in the past, the company is adapting grades to match changing markets. Number 14 machine still produces heavyweight coated paper, but it also produces specialty papers for products like coated one-side labels, thermal bar coating, gift bags, and coffee bags. This year's $47 million rebuild on number 16 machine is another example of Stora Enso's commitment to the future. And the dedication and teamwork of the mill's employees are making it happen. It's been this way for more than a century, with the tradition of paper making that spans generations. There is more to being a leader than being first or being the best. Employees are designing and setting standards that others can only hope to follow, positioning the Wisconsin Rapids Mill for another century of growth and success.
And with that, I'll say so long for now until next time, God willing. And once again, encourage you to keep those pictures coming so that you too can share them with others and be a part of my next History by Request. I'm Paul Gross. Thanks for listening.